Welcome to this historic location. History organizations are created to fulfill a mission. Our mission is to connect the people in Elizabeth to their surroundings. Some of us have been here for generations. Some of us have arrived very recently. Both groups should have an opportunity to know how we came here and what Elizabeth has done, is doing, and will do in the future. I came here in 1971. Our regular presentation to students continues to focus on Elizabeth and world trade and the occupations related to that history. Factories and products come and go, but the constant feature in Elizabeth is trade and transportation and the employment activities that relate to those areas. We tell students and visitors about our first colonial Elizabeth exports. These were food and seafood products because very little infrastructure is needed to participate in that type of employment. The furs were often gathered by local farmers when farm workers were not needed, essentially in the winter. No doubt furs were traded with Indians who were ready consumers for trade goods. The furs were traded to ships going to London, and some of the furs would have ultimately been sold in China by way of Russia. Our local infrastructure, particularly roads, developed, and we could expand exports into farm products, including flax and wood. Our main market was food for the Caribbean islands of Jamaica and Barbados. The same ships that took our exports to those islands returned with molasses, using our exported wood for heat, and other imported items came from that area like tea. You all remember the Tea Party, and if you read into the Tea Party, the East India Company was attempting to dump an awful lot of tea. And so that the arguments about product dumping actually go back to that 1776 period. When giving these talks to students, I wear a flax reproduction of a New Jersey Blues colonial uniform and carry import and export items with me. And most of those exhibits are over there. Anyone wants to look and see why they're important to the history of Elizabeth can do so after the talk. Physical items that students can touch increases their future recollection of the subject matter, just as the existence of our two fine structures brings to mind history to every passerby using East Jersey Street. Bunnell House across the street predates the existence of the United States by more than a century, and George Washington's birth by about 70 years. As trade increased and our infrastructure in all modes of transportation improved and the support for the shipping industry grew, new jobs and new immigrants with the skills to support that expansion arrived here. In the 1700s, we were mainly dependent on ships. In the 1800s, we added railroads, and in the 1900s, we added trucks, pipelines, and airplanes. Today, the ships are much larger, the railroad cars much heavier, and the trucks and pipelines much bigger, bringing the cost per ton of transportation much lower. Locally, we have the infrastructure to process the massive fuel needs of each form of transportation. In the 1800s and the first half of the 1900s, Elizabeth increased the manufacture of products highlighted by the Singer Company. That aspect of our economic history has declined. However, transport aspect has increased. Other ideas and industries will come and go, but transport and trade will remain. Trade is the constant. One of the great pleasures of being associated with the Elizabeth Historical Society is the random calls that come in from seemingly nowhere and ask a question as, "My grandmother collected historic pictures of Elizabeth. Would you like them?" Last November, I received such a call. The caller stated, "I have hundreds of old documents." The caller continues and says that some of the documents are very old. I asked him to read any one of them. He proceeds to read a deed from the 1680s for the Bunnell homestead, which is our office across the street. So that means the second owner of the Belle house acquired the house in 1680, and we believe that the Nathaniel, that's Nathaniel right there. By the way, that's Mrs. Belle's mark. She didn't write, obviously, so that's Susanna's mark. So anyway, here is the deed that sold the house in 1680. So we at least know the house had its second owner in 1680. We believe the house predated 1662. We can argue about what's a house and what isn't, but it's arguably the oldest house in New Jersey. Probably there are barns that predate that, and there may be some dwellings, but I think we have certainly the oldest in Elizabeth. There are There are very few living folks that would know the origin of this collection, and the caller has found me, and I am one of those few living folks. These are the Dead Sea Scrolls of Elizabeth history, lost for 50 years and now found and protected. The collection has about 3,500 signatures on about 500 documents. I doubt that anyone footnoted in the various histories about Elizabeth from before 1800 is not included in this collection. Many of the signature writers are buried in our two well-known cemeteries. And it happens I have all of the tombstones of both our major cemeteries, and I have looked up a good number of the people in these documents, and they are indeed buried right here in Elizabeth. The names, the names would have been instantly recognizable to any school child in the mid-1800s when this collection was assembled. Abraham Clark, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and an Elizabeth surveyor, has a signature on a number of the documents and deeds. So that he was of particular interest because he has a lot of land research, which was particularly useful in writing the history, which is, as we were. I keep buying copies on the internet, so if anyone wants a copy, let me know and I won't bid against you. These are good to have. It's a very good history. Two documents that were of special interest in that they're both rare and most unusual. The two are slave sale documents, one in 1794 and the other in 1802. Slave documents with signatures of prominent citizens is pretty good history. How about documents 8 years apart for the same slave? Again, with the signatures of prominent local citizens. Aaron Lane, who had a clock shop down the street, was one of those signatures on these documents. The documents were presented to a local group of block watchers at a dinner in our Belle house, and their response was dramatic. Before them, in cloth paper and ink, was absolute proof of black presence in Elizabeth, first as an adolescent female and again as a young woman of about age 24. A potential study project could be an effort to identify any descendant remaining Elizabeth or learn whatever else happened to Sarah over her lifespan. The entire collection was assembled by Ernest L. Mayer, the surveyor of the city of Elizabeth in the late 1800s. The collection predates Mayer's employment with the city when he worked for a firm in New York which was involved in surveying the New York and New Jersey area. Most of the collection was assembled before 1840. The firm had a history going back to the mid-1700s. From these documents, Mayer could help produce neighborhood maps. These maps are not anywhere else published. They are one-of-a-kind originals. The documents were available to Theodore Thayer when he wrote As We Were more than 50 years ago. In the late 1800s, by the way, many of you live on streets in Elizabeth that were designed by Mr. Mayer, and the sewer systems and the drainage were products of his surveyor's activity. And he was a very well-educated technician and engineer, and a good lot of the good planning in Elizabeth is due to Mr. Myers and his efforts. In the late 1800s, Ernest Meyer attempted to publish this collection in a series of books. The project never received a source of funding, and so the collection began its slide into oblivion for half a century until Thayer reviewed it for certain details. The History Society also has access to many of Meyer's maps, and these frequently help Elizabeth callers who seek neighborhood property classification on earlier use of their property. These maps are not anywhere else available to the callers. The service is one way we meet our goal to connect people in Elizabeth with their surroundings. This evening, Mike will present material that continues our work on monuments in Scott Park. The material has been gathered and reinterpreted by students who usually work on environmental issues. These students developed a fresh perspective on one of the monuments that was quite different from our first interpretation. This is an example of our citizen historians developing an insight not noted elsewhere. Mike, where are you? It's up to you.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming tonight. My part of the presentation will focus on Scott Park and some of the monuments, one that's in Scott Park and the other two that are outside City Hall, actually. Here you'll see a postcard of Scott Park, and today it's home to numerous monuments and dedications which show the city's appreciation and honor for people who are willing to sacrifice their lives to protect democracy at home and throughout the world. That first picture was the Vietnam Memorial, which we discussed actually at a forum last year, which is right on Elizabeth Avenue. The next picture is the World War I Memorial, which lists Elizabeth residents who fought and died in World War I. That's in the center of the park. The next picture is a memorial to World War II and Korean War soldiers. And finally, the last picture that we have here that we went over last year was General Scott, which is on East Jersey Street, right in the center of the park with two cannons on either side of him. Also in the park, it memorializes people who spent their lives fighting to protect the civil liberties afforded to all people in our own democratic nation. That's the monument to Dr. Martin Luther King, and as you know, the side street by the high school is named after him as well. Several monuments also mark historic events that have impacted the city of Elizabeth, such as George Washington's inauguration as he traveled through Elizabeth here, and also a memorial to those who died aboard the Challenger space shuttle en route to explore what lies beyond this world. Finally, today Scott Park has also memorialized Jose Marti of Cuba and also General Jose Artigas of Uruguay, which cements people of different cultures who share our same ideals with that of Elizabeth and this nation. Scott Park is located in the center of Elizabeth between Elizabeth Ave and East Jersey Street, just east of the Commercial Center on Broad Street. The park's western boundary is Winfield Scott Plaza, and the other border on the east is Martin Luther King Boulevard. The park is formerly known as Horse Hollow, and as you could see what the park was is that highlighted portion there. And you could see it contained a stream which ran through the length of the center of the land with a pond on Madison Ave where General Winfield Scott once lived, and this home right there. That home has since been razed, and the next picture will show the BP gas station where the current location of that home was. And the stream that ran through the park empties into Elizabeth River. On either side of the stream, you'll see that there's two roads were built, each connecting Elizabeth Ave, or what was then known as Water Street, and East Jersey Street. Before it was formally created into a park, the land on the west side was of a higher grade than the east. That's the City Hall side was a higher grade. At some point, the stream that ran through was cared for by a sewer that runs underneath the ground, and the park was leveled out to give it the form that it takes today. The map of Elizabethtown, New Jersey at the time of Revolutionary War was created by Ernest Meyer, who Ken recently spoke of, does not indicate that anyone actually owned the land which now consists of Scott Park. It does indicate, however, that several people own the plots of land that now occupy the block where City Hall is and across the street where Thomas Jefferson High School is. Jonathan Dayton, the youngest signatory to the United States Constitution and our nation's fourth Speaker of the House of Representatives, owned the plot of land to the east of the park, which consisted of the land between East Jersey and Elizabeth Ave, between what's now Martin Luther King Boulevard to Morrell Street. The plot appears to be simply a pasture and did not contain any dwelling structure. Perhaps Jonathan Dayton bought this plot of land, expecting its central location in Elizabethtown to increase in value, as he did have an interest in land speculation. In fact, land speculation is what got Jonathan Dayton in a bit of hot water. He lost a lot of money throughout his career, and although he did have a stellar political career, he was tied in with a scandal with Aaron Burr, and Aaron Burr was later indicted for treason and later acquitted, but after he was connected with that scandal, Jonathan Dayton's political career more or less ended. Nevertheless, he was a prominent figure of Elizabethtown. On the west side of Scott Park, the plot of land, which was originally owned by Governor Philip Carteret, and it contained an orchard on a 4-acre plot. Later, the land was divided into 9 different lots along the road, which is now Winfield Scott Plaza. Jonathan Dayton also owned the first plot on this side, fronting the road from the courthouse, which is now Elizabeth Avenue. Heading north, the next plots were owned by the Price family, Henry Inslee, William Woodruff, Sam Woodruff, and Elias Dayton, who was the father of Jonathan Dayton, mayor of Elizabeth, and also a veteran of the French and Indian War and American Revolution. Several dwelling houses existed on that side of the park, which also included William Woodruff, who fought in the American Revolution. In 1806, the Adelphian Academy was built on Water Street, which is now Elizabeth Avenue, at the southern end of Horse Hollow. Dr. Matthias Williamson was the first president of that school, and Isaac Crane was the first headmaster. In 1865, the brick building which housed the Adelphian Academy was taken down in order to make way for the construction of City Hall in 1865. This building was built in 1865 at a cost of $80,000, which, according to a recent research I did, would be about $2.1 million today. It was a 2-story structure which extended from Elizabeth Avenue, where the Vietnam Memorial is today, all the way back to where Dickinson Street cuts through the park. The first floor of City Hall was originally a public market, likely filled with butchers, grocers, offering a rich variety of food and supply for the city's residents at good prices, thanks to Elizabeth's close proximity to New York and ease of travel by rail or waterway. The market also had the advantage of a fresh supply of vegetables and country produce at prices even lower than the markets of New York, these coming from local gardens and farms throughout Elizabeth and Union County. The county had recently, during the time of this building's construction, macadamized roads which helped ease the traffic of produce all over the county into the center of the city. Also, the market likely had an abundant selection of seafood from Newark Bay and the Arthur Kill, especially oysters, which were a local favorite. The building served as City Hall until about 1940, when the new City Hall was constructed on Winfield Scott Plaza and still today is in operation. Directly across the street on Martin Luther King Boulevard stands another significant structure built in 1928, which is Thomas Jefferson High School. The following picture also shows a picture of Jefferson High School taken from the center of the park. Now, of the 3 memorials that we chose, the first to go in depth today, The first is the USS New Jersey Belle. This bell is a symbol of ingenuity and power, and the reasons I'll explain to you why. This bell was on a battleship, the USS New Jersey, which was built for the U.S. Navy in 1902 in Quincy, Massachusetts. The ship was 441 feet long, which was big enough to carry a crew of 812 officers and sailors. The battleship was equipped with 4 300-millimeter guns and 8 200-millimeter guns, making up the main battery offensive. The ship was also constructed in mind to take a beating as well. For close-range defense against torpedo boats, the ship had 12 3-inch guns on the hull. In addition, they also had 12 3-pounder guns for short-range defense. Although it was not the biggest of the Navy's fleet, it was a symbol of ingenuity, and the ship was well prepared for battle. It finally launched on November 10th, 1904 into sea. And on May 12th, 1906, almost exactly 110 years ago today, the USS New Jersey was commissioned as part of the U.S. fleet, and Captain William Kimball, a veteran of the Spanish-American War, was in command. President Theodore Roosevelt, also a veteran of the Spanish-American War, had this battleship take part in a naval review in September of that same year. A naval review is an event where most, if not all, of the U.S. ships would pass by a certain point where the president could then view, or the admiral could then view and take account his ships. The location of this one where President Roosevelt chose was Oyster Bay in Long Island, which not so coincidentally is where President Roosevelt had his home. In fact, during his presidency, it was known as the Summer White House. So this was probably Labor Day weekend, and he just wanted to see the ships pass by, I guess. So the USS New Jersey later set sail to Cuba, where it protected American lives abroad during an insurrection on the Caribbean island. President Roosevelt also commissioned this battleship as part of the convoy known as the Great White Fleet. The Great White Fleet consisted of 16 battleships and was ordered by President Roosevelt to circumnavigate the world. On December 16, 1907, the Great White Fleet left the port of Hamptons, Virginia, and did not return until February 22, 1909, after it completely circumnavigated the globe. In accomplishing this feat, President Roosevelt was able to show the world, and Japan in particular, that the United States Navy was among the most powerful, if not the most powerful Navy in the world. The Great White Fleet was on one of many feats accomplished by the United States in the early 20th century that established our nation's military and technological dominance in the world. The USS New Jersey continued its relevance by sailing numerous times up and down the Atlantic. It served as a training battleship during World War I, and the battleship was finally decommissioned in 1920. 3 years later, the battleship was actually sunk off the coast of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, in a series of test bombs conducted by the U.S. Army. The location of the Belle is right to the right of City Hall, and the ship donated to the city of Elizabeth when it was decommissioned in 1920, and it was first displayed on the second floor of the old City Hall. In 1940, however, sailors and Marines who had served on this ship were invited to Elizabeth for the unveiling of the Belle at its current location in front of the new City Hall. Here's one of the pictures of the ship. I think there's a few more that follow. That's another one. And then the last picture, this is the U.S. Army conducted bomb tests. I guess that's how they got rid of the ships. But so, where it's established is right in front of City Hall on the right, and is a symbol, anchors the city as it shows a symbol of power and ingenuity. Now, on the left side of City Hall stands the Military Order of the Purple Heart Monument. This monument is a symbol of bravery and loyalty. The Purple Heart is an award given to those who are wounded or killed in any action against an enemy of the United States. It's a symbol of courage and dedication in the face of mortal danger. It is the oldest American military combat honor. The mission of the Military Order of the Purple Heart is to foster an environment of goodwill and camaraderie among combat wounded veterans, promote patriotism, support necessary legislative initiatives, and most importantly, provide service to all veterans and their families. The groundwork for the Purple Heart was established by General George Washington in Newburgh, New York on August 7, 1782, near the end of the American Revolution. During this time, General Washington reflected on the sacrifices that the soldiers made and decided to honor them and pay tribute to their service. It was here that he created the Badge of Military Merit, which is the foreground for the Purple Heart. Only 3 people received it in the Revolution. However, the badge gained popularity in folklore and grew as a legend. And after World War I, Army Chief of Staff General Charles Summerall directed that a bill be drafted and sent to Congress to revive the Badge of Military Merit. Later, General Douglas MacArthur continued this project, which would ultimately become the Purple Heart. The Purple Heart has an organization in Union County that has dedicated similar monuments in different cities and towns, including Garwood, Clark, New Providence, and the one here in Elizabeth. It has 124 members, and it's dedicated to all veterans who served in World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam War, and reminds family and citizens the dangers and experience of the Americans' wounded soldiers. World War I, approximately over 320,000 have received it. In World War II, over 1 million. The Korean War, 118,000. Vietnam, over 350,000. Persian Gulf, 607. The Afghanistan, over 7,000. In the Iraq War, over 35,000 men and women have received the Purple Heart, which is an astounding number. The Elizabeth Monument was made here in New Jersey, cost $6,000, and was paid for by the members. There are many different Purple Heart foundations that help all veterans and their families. Notable Union County recipients are Anthony LaFerrara, past president of this Union County chapter and the state Purple Heart organization. He was wounded in Italy in World War II. And also a recent recipient, Glenn John Zamorsky, is a veteran who lived in Elizabeth, gave the ultimate sacrifice in the Vietnam War, and received the Purple Heart 47 years later, just last year, and it was accepted by his brother on his behalf, John Zamorsky. The third monument that we looked at is the United Singers Monument, which was dedicated in July of 1915. Looking through the park, it doesn't seem really to fit necessarily, because most of the monuments are dedicated to war veterans, soldiers, and those who gave their lives for the country. And this monument is dedicated. It's a plaque for a group that won a singing competition. But after looking at it, at first walking through and before really looking at it, I said, well, this doesn't really belong here. I wonder why it's here. But it is very important because it's a symbol of culture and integration. This monument, as you can see here, is a rectangular bronze plaque placed in the front center of a roughly textured granite slab. In the upper left, the plaque is a portrait of an Austrian composer, and on the plaque also stands the Goddess of Victory holding a laurel victory wreath and also a gem of her gown. The plaque is a scene with a man in a profile seated on a log in the forest, and his hand is raised as if conducting a singing group. The sculpture is mounted on a short rectangular base. 3 singing societies of the area joined to form the United Singers. They won the first prize in the contest for organizations of cities of the second class at the Triennial Sangerfest in Brooklyn, New York, on June 3rd, 1915. They received this plaque weighing over 100 pounds, and it was presented to the city of Elizabeth by Mayor Victor Mravlak. The United Singers was a male chorus of 140 members. formed by three groups: the Mannenchor, the Liederkranz Society, and the Sanger Society. The chorus was directed by Earl Kapp, whose repertoire included humorous reference to the German opponents in the European War. So that's where the significance of the monument really comes in, is that it's really a German immigrant group during the time of World War I. In the 1880s, a dramatic influx of German immigrants came to Elizabeth, and the singing societies brought both vocal and instrumental music to an eager public, but also served to perpetuate the German customs and language. Many of its members later fought in World War II in the U.S. forces. The United Singers Monuments represents a moment of history in which Elizabeth and the German community played a significant role in Elizabeth. Winning this prize was an occasion of cultural pride and motivation to pursue music as education, refinement, and class. Here it is today in the center of the park, and you can see in the back the new construction, which is more fully along at this point of the new high school to be built. Now, as I said first, it didn't really seem to fit in initially to the memorials in the park. But what it is a symbol of German immigrants gaining a foothold in this. It's a symbol of German immigrants gaining a foothold in Elizabeth, and the city giving back their appreciation for their contributions. As you can imagine, this is not a popular time to be German in the country, as there's much American nativists putting down and not really accepting German people. But here, Elizabeth was on the forefront of accepting immigrants and allowing them to be part of our culture. And next year, when we uncover other monuments, we could see that Elizabeth continues to do that and continues to be a leader in that. And it's important for our city's sense of pride, and also it shows our city's strength. So with that, I would like to thank the Elizabeth Citizen Historian team, Diana Vivanco, Tatiana Leguizamon, Saida Kaye, and Jacqueline Williams. And here I'm going to introduce our newest trustee, Diana Vivanco, and Tatiana Leguizamon.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. We are part, this Tatiana, we and me, and with Saida and with Jacqueline, we were part of the first Elizabeth Citizen Historians team. We work in the fall, and the goal of this team was we were college students, and the goal is, as a part of community, research about the history of our community as members of the community. And with the help with the local library, we found a good research, a good resource there. Thank you for your help. We prepare a letter for the future generation, for the future team, that will be hopefully enjoy as the same as we enjoy doing this research. I'm going to read this letter, and Tatiana is going to do it in Spanish. Okay. Dear fellow Elizabeth Citizen historians, it's our pleasure to welcome you to the experience of learning about our history from a community member perspective. With the support of the Historical Society of Elizabeth, New Jersey, you will be conducting research on a piece of history and presenting your findings through the most appropriate media to the community. Based on our first experience, let us tell you that your perspective is going to change. There is a before and an after your research. You are not going to see your city in the same way. You are going to plan and follow a research process. During this process, you will be eager to know more about your team and sometimes be amazed with your findings. The best part comes when you analyze your information into the context of the past, not only locally, but internationally. It is important to keep the dynamic conversations. The best interpretations are made in groups. Questioning why this piece of history is important and how it's relevant to the present is going to lead you to interesting conclusions. Finally, there are no Elizabeth citizen historians without community engagement. You will have to find the best way to communicate your findings and connections. You will realize how history can help us to build our identity as a community. Looking at how decisions were made in the past is a good reference for our present choices that are going to affect our future. Making history. Signed, the first Elizabeth Citizen Historians team, Diana Vivanco, Zaida Calle, Tatiana Leguizamón, and Jacqueline Williams.
Estimados ciudadanos, historiadores de Elizabeth, es un placer darles la bienvenida a la experiencia de aprender sobre nuestra historia desde la perspectiva de un miembro de la comunidad. Con el apoyo de la Sociedad Histórica de Elizabeth, Nueva Jersey, usted llevará a cabo la investigación de una parte de la historia y presentará sus resultados a través de los medios más apropiados para la comunidad. Sobre la base de nuestra primera experiencia, permítanos informarle que su punto de vista va a cambiar. Hay un antes y un después de su investigación. Usted va a ver su ciudad no va a ver su ciudad de la misma manera. Usted va a planificar y seguir un proceso de investigación. Durante este proceso, usted estará ansioso por saber más sobre el tema y a veces se sorprenderá por los hallazgos. La mejor parte viene cuando se analiza la información en el contexto de un paso no solo a nivel local, sino también a nivel nacional e internacional. Es importante mantener la conversación y las mejores interpretaciones se hacen en grupo. Cuestionando por esta pieza de historia es importante y porque es relevante para el presente y va a llevar a conclusiones interesantes. Por último, no hay ciudadanos historiadores de Elizabeth sin participar de la comunidad. Usted tendrá que encontrar la mejor manera de comunicar sus conclusiones y conexiones. Se dará cuenta de cómo la historia puede ayudarnos a construir una nueva identidad como comunidad. Ver cómo se tomarán las decisiones en el pasado en una buena referencia para nuestras decisiones presentes que van a afectar a nuestro futuro haciendo historia. Que tengan un proyecto exitoso, el primer equipo de historiadores de la ciudad de Elizabeth, Diana Bianco, Zaida Calle, Tatiana Leguizamón y Jacqueline Williams.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. Any questions or any comments or any other